Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and welcome to my tutorial on using the MySQL Workbench diagrammer to design relational databases. Okay, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fire up the Workbench tool. Okay, and I'm going to say I want a new diagram. So what do? In the current version of Workbench, uh, the the selection of the function that you want to do is over here in this far left panel. Up until now, what we've been doing is we've been going up to this top one, which gets us a connection. Instead of that, we want to go to the middle one here, which gets us the diagrammer. So we click on that, and then we're going to want a new uh, model. Okay, so we're creating a relational database model using the diagrammer. So we're going to click on the plus icon, and here we go. All right, that looks good. And what are we going to do? Well, let's uh, let's add to the diagram. So we're going to create a model from scratch. So I'm going to double click on this add diagram, and I got the diagram. And you can see over here it's created a model for me. Okay. Now right away you can see that the model is called MyDB. So that's the name of the schema that I'm going to get. Well, that's a nice default, but it's not what I want. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. For my example here, I'm going to create an orders database, an order database. So I'm going to highlight that and right click, edit schema. Okay. And so let's call it something like, let's call it order processing. This is the database to support order processing. Okay. And I've got that. And I want to tab off of that field so we have it. And then you can see over here it's already turned into order processing. That's good. Very good. I've taken care of that. All right. So how do I add tables? Well, it's pretty easy. There's a table icon here. Okay, so let's look at this would be a typical customer uh, order item kind of database. So let's create a new table. Okay, so we click on this table icon, and that loads up the cursor. And then we're going to click out in the diagrammer, and it says table 1. Well, that's not too descriptive. Let's double click on the table 1 icon, and now we get into the editor. And my editor is set such it's all the way up over top of the diagram. And these two things can coexist. So I can kind of, down here, instead of table 1, I want to call this customer. I'd like to name my tables in the singular. Okay. And of course, a customer is going to have a customer ID. Now I could probably go and change the defaults such that this automatically would come up as customer ID. Comes up as ID customer now. I'm not going to worry about it. Just going to type over it customer ID. It's an int. I want it to be a primary key. Okay, so that's it. So for right now, I've just got a customer. It has a primary key. That's all I'm going to have on it. Uh, Next, I want to have an order. Okay, and I want to be able to build a relationship between the customer and the order. So here we go. I load up the table tool again, come out here and drop that table on there. And if I double click on that, it switches the editor such now I'm in this the new table one, and let's call that order. Okay, and it's going to have a primary key. That'll be order ID. Okay, and it's an int. That's fine. It's a primary key. That's a little weird that it doesn't want to go right to primary key, but it did. Okay. Good. So I have this. So I've got the two tables, and now I need a relationship between them. So how to create a relationship between them? Well, most relationships in relational between relational tables are one to many in some direction or other. Okay, and what the way they're implemented is we create a foreign key on the many side, and that points to the primary key on the one side. So here's how we do this. We're going to go to this one to n tool down here, the one that has the dashed line that says non-identifying relationships. We're going to click on that. And how do we draw this? Well, click on the many side and then click on the one side. Okay. So let's see. One customer can have many orders. Each order is for one and only one customer. So the many side is the order side. So I'm going to click on the order side and then I'm click on the customer side. And there it is. It drew it right across. Very nice. Okay. Um, and do I want some kind of label here? Well, right now I think I have the labels turned off. We'll see. But if I double click on that line, let me double click on that line. You can say it says foreign key order customer. Okay. So what it is, it's the name of the foreign key constraint. And at this point, I don't think I want to show that. If this were a conceptual data model, I'd probably want to just type over this and put the name of the relationship here, which should be customer has order. So we might make this the names of the relationships, which we do show in conceptual data models. We might have called this for customer. The order is for a customer. Okay. And it's still not showing. That's because you have to go up to your preferences wherever you find them, and the Mac OS version, it's you go up here to MySQL Workbench preferences, and then you go to down here in the modeling, you go to diagram, um, and down here for the relationships, show captions. Okay, so let's say okay on that. And now we see the captions. Okay, now if we're already working on a logical data model or a physical data model, it would be more appropriate to show the name of the foreign key constraint. So what I typically do at this point is when I do this, I turn off the I turn off the names. So I come down to the diagram and I say don't want to show the captions on the relationships because they're only going to show me the names of the foreign key constraints. And again, let's just get rid of this relationship line and draw it again. I had it. Yeah, there it is. So let's say we want to cut that. Oh, thought I was going to cut it. Nope. I didn't cut it. I don't seem to be able to get rid of that relationship. Huh. Delete. There it goes. Delete. Okay, so that's gone. So now I'm not showing the names, and if I create the relationship, and again, I want to remind you, come down here on this 1 to end with the dashed line, load that up, and click on the many side, click on the one side, and there you go. And then again, if you do highlight that relationship, you can see, sorry, you have to double click on it. You can't see that the generated name is the generated name of the foreign key constraint. Okay, so this is a typical one-to-many. Each a customer can have many orders. Okay, and I think that's properly set. Okay, now what about some kind of a many-to-many? Okay, like what's the relationship between orders and products? Okay, we don't call these items, even though people usually do say orders and items. But let's say this is a product. Okay, so let's create a product table over here. And we'll double click on it and we'll call it product. All right, and it's going to need a primary key. Let's give it a product ID. And click on primary key again. I have to click on that twice. Okay, so now the question is, between orders and products, we have a many-to-many. Now, why do we have a many-to-many? Well, your typical order has order lines, okay? Typically, you don't want to sell just one product to one individual, okay? And you want many to many. You also want to know things like how many of the product were ordered on that order line. Was it one? Was it three? You typically want to know what the price was too, because we're going to know what the list price of the product is, but we don't know what the actual price is. Okay, so we need a many-to-many between here. Now, the easiest way to do this in the current version of the diagrammer is to go down and find the many-to-many relationship. It's right here. So it says N to M identifying relationship. This is a way to get it. Okay, so load that up. Okay, and click on one side, order, and then click on the other, product. Okay, and what you do is it generates for you the associative or the linking or the intersection table. Okay, now that's the easiest way to make it work on the current version of the diagrammer. All right, that's kind of changed. I think it changed about a year ago. Okay, now first of all, is this called it? It typically gives it the name that it builds out of the two the two tables it's trying to connect with an associative entity. So it calls it order has a product. That's not a bad name, okay? But there is a term of art for this, okay? There are a couple of ways you can name these associative entities. One is you could say something like order has product. That's a nice name. More typical is people do something they call it order underscore product. So let's see that. We're going to double click on this guy and we're going to give him just the name order product. If you call the product an item, it becomes order item. That's a very, very popular name, order product. Okay. Or even better here, there's a term of art for this relationship that's called order line. So let's call it order line. So we're going to come in here and call it order line. Okay. And then we'll click off of that. Now it's called order line. Okay, great. Now, uh, you'll notice that it has these solid lines that connect it. And what do they mean? Well, they mean even though we don't see a primary key symbol next to order ID and product ID, uh, in the old days we used to, I don't know, the diagrammer kind of shifts its behavior from time to time. But when you have something like this, it's essentially saying the primary key for order line is a combination of order ID and product ID. And these are foreign keys, which point to the neighboring tables. And because the primary key is made up of kind of borrowed values from the neighboring tables, it's an identifying relationship, and they get solid lines. Okay, well, how do we stop that happening? Well, what we could do is we could give the order line its own ID. Okay. Now, why would we want to do that? Would we only want to do this to be able to get rid of the solid lines and stop thinking of the order line table as some kind of a not so powerful table because it doesn't have its own proper ID? Well, some people would. But the more practical reason why you want a more powerful primary key here is the question is, do you only want to be able to sell one order line for a particular product? Okay, so let's say the products that we're selling, office supplies, so um, Pentel pencils. So right now we can say that the customer ordered Pentel pencils. Okay, we still don't know how many of them. Okay, we probably ought to add that. Okay, let's add another field. Call it quantity. Okay, and quantity can be an int because it's not the primary key. Take that off of there. It can be an int. Okay. We don't want it to be null. Okay, that's fine. So now we know we can say 300 Pentel pencils. Okay. Well, at what price? Well, the product should have a price. Let's go to that. Uh, shouldn't it have a list price? Sure it should. Let's say a list price. Okay. And let's say that's a decimal. And let's say it's 7 digits null, 2 decimal digits. Okay, we don't want that to be null either. Take the null out of that. Okay, that's fine. Now, is everything going to be sold at the list price? Well, no. And the reason things aren't always sold at the list price is that, of course, over time, this list price is going to change. Okay, so it becomes a good idea to decide what the sale price was. Okay, so let's go back to order line and we'll give it a sell price. And let's give it a product ID quantity. What's called actual price as compared to the list price. Okay, and that'll be the same thing. It'll be a decimal, 7 digits overall, 2 to the right of the decimal point, not null. Okay, so now we know how many we sold, right? We know at what price. Now the nice thing here is that theoretically we could sell some Pentel pencils on a special deal. Let's say we had a special on, and you could order up to 300 of them and pay $5. So we would put in uh, the order ID, the product ID, $305. But what if they wanted to order some at the list price, which let's say is $10? That they wanted to order another 100 at the $10 price. Well, we don't have, because each order line just has the order ID and the product ID, we can only sell them at one price until we can have more than one order line for the same product ID. So what people usually do here is that they come back and say, oh, on this order line, let's give it its own ID. Let's give it an order line ID. Order line ID. Let's give it that. And that's just going to be a plain int. Okay, and that is a primary key. And let's go back to those other things that we said were the primary key, the order ID and the product ID. Let's say they're not primary keys anymore. Okay, that's fine. Okay, now, and this order line ID is the primary key. And then why don't we move that up? So we can just say move up till we get to the top. Where's our order line ID? It's a little bit of a pain. Move up. I think we need to do it one more time. Order line ID, move up. Okay, so here we have the order line has its own ID, and we probably, you know what I would do is I would auto increment it. So every time we create an order line, it's a new order line. It just has the next higher integer. And then what's interesting here is that the order ID and the product ID, they're foreign keys and they make the relationships go. But you can see now they're not identifying anymore because order line has a proper ID of its own. It's not borrowing its primary key from values on the neighboring tables. And so we've done two things. One is we got rid of the solid lines, okay? And the solid lines were certain people would call these entities or tables that had solid lines connecting them to their neighbors. They would call them weak entities or weak tables because they didn't have their own unique primary key scheme. Well, what we've done is we've given it its own unique primary key scheme order line ID, and so that weakness aspect goes away. So we get rid of the solid line, we go back to the dashed. But more importantly, okay, uh, what's happening here is that we can now sell more than one order line for the same product on the same invoice. So we can sell sort of 300 at $5 and 100 at $10. Okay, maybe the special was to say, well, you know, for this month alone, you can order up to 300 for $5, but if you want to order more than 300, then you have to pay the regular price. Okay? So it turns out that in a lot of these many-to-many relationships, even though you can build them like we did, where we pulled out remember we pulled out this many-to-many with the solid line. When you connect these two things, order and product, it is going to assume that these are identifying relationships, that the table in the middle is one of these weak entities. It doesn't have its own proper ID. But the problem is that you can only have one connection between each of these. And it's usually a more general design to give this um, associative table its own ID. Say that the the foreign keys that implement the relationships are not part of the primary key. Then you go back to dashed lines, which I think um, looks better aesthetically and even in terms of the design values. And then you can have more than one. So on a particular order, you can have more than one order line for the same product. And there are times when you want this and times when you don't. But in this particular application, this is what we want. Okay, so when you're trying to draw a money to many, okay, which you can only implement with an associative table, it used to be with the diagrammer that you could just plop a table out here to be the associative table and try to connect it to both sides. That doesn't work very well in the diagrammer anymore. And that's a shame. So the only way, the easiest way to create these associative entities or associative tables is again to go down here to the many with the solid line, to load up the cursor with that, to click on the two things you want to connect with a many to many. You can click on either one of them first and the other one second, and then it will draw that associative entity in there. It assumes it's a weak entity. Okay. It assumes that the relationships to two sides are identifying relationships. And you can leave it like that, or you can come back like we did here, give that table or entity its own ID, say that the two foreign keys are not part of the primary key anymore, in which case it's going to relax and go back to the dashed line. Okay, that's that. So that's how to draw these things in the current world. Let me save this. So I'm going to save the model as, and I'm going to go out and put this in my courseware. And I'm going to come down here and find a home for it. And this 490 course. And where am I going to put it? Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong course. Okay, I'm going to pause until I find the right course. Okay, so here's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be on IS 490DB, and I've got demonstrations, and this one is for new folder. This one's for chapter 10. And then I want to call this order order line products database. Oh, we called it order processing, didn't we? Yeah, just call it order processing. Order processing is the name we're going to use. Okay, we have that. And then how do we print this? Well, generally, I tell people to print it by going up here and saying File, Print to File, and then picking PDF and doing that. Okay, I have had some people in my class who are using Mac OS that have had some problems with that. Another way I can do it on my Mac here is I can say File, Print, and then I can come down here to the PDF options and say Save as PDF. And hopefully that's going to work for whoever do this. So say order processing PDF. Okay. And let me just go find that and make sure that we can make that work. So this courseware development. We're down here. And then we've got demonstrations, chapter 10. There it is. Oh, it came up on the other monitor. So that came up all the way over here. Okay, so if we do that, we should be okay. All right, so yeah, there we are. And let's do this at 150. Okay, pull this over here, something like that. The problems that people were experiencing on Mac OS is that they weren't seeing the lines. And I think that has to do with whether we're using the Mac viewer for PDFs or whether we're using the Adobe one. At least the way I've configured my machine, when I do the workflow that I just showed, that makes sure I'm using the Adobe one, which I've installed on my machine. Okay, so that's that. That's how to get the many-to-many work in the current version of the diagrammer. I hope that's going to be helpful. And I'm going to say bye for now. Bye-bye.